Yeah, that's good. I'm going to call to order the House Armed Services Committee Subcommittee on Readiness. I want to wish everybody a good morning and thank you all for being here today for our readiness hearing on the effects of reduced infrastructure and base operating support investments on Air Force readiness. This is our third hearing on this topic. The Army, the Marine Corps, and the Navy have previously testified on this topic, and I look forward to hearing the views of the Air Force today. This morning we have with us Major General Timothy Green, U.S. Air Force Director of Civil Engineers, Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection, Headquarters, U.S. Air Force. Major General Jerry D. Harris, U.S. Air Force Vice Commander, Air Combat Command, Langley Air Force Base in the great state of Virginia. Brigadier General Christopher Azzano, U.S. Air Force Commander, 96th Test Wing, Air Force Materiel, Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. During the last several years, the subcommittee has largely focused on operational readiness recovery since the drawdown of forces in the Middle East. The Department of Defense has implemented plans to correct readiness trends, but those plans have assumed risk in infrastructure investments and reduced mission support services to redirect funds from installation programs to other operational and training budget priorities. The purpose of this hearing is to clarify the Air Force's choices for infrastructure and installation services, to address funding priorities and mitigation strategies, and to gather more detail on the current and future impacts of these decisions on operations and training. As the witnesses testify today, I would ask you to address existing risks being taken in installation investments and impacts to operations and training. How will the recent two-year budget reshape those risks and impacts? And what will be the level of risk and impacts over the next 10 years if budget levels remain constant or return to sequestration levels? I would now like to turn to our ranking member, Madeline Bordallo, for any remarks that she may have. Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for arranging this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here this morning. This hearing concludes the first series of hearings we are conducting to look into how reduced infrastructure investments affect the readiness of our force. However, I am sure that this discussion will continue, and to the witnesses again, thank you for all your service and for being here today. Over the years, this subcommittee has closely examined issues affecting the state of our military's readiness and the devastating impacts that sequestration and unpredictable funding have had. Although the Air Force is the last service to be examined in this series of hearings, it is clear that it is far from immune to the fiscal challenges that have required you to balance competing requirements with limited funds. And to that end, it is in these subcommittee hearings that we are attempting to understand the impact that budget decisions regarding military infrastructure and installation support are having and will have on training and readiness. Now, we have heard evidence from several military installations that is indicative of adverse impacts to training and operations due to degraded infrastructure and installation support. If this is the case, and there are indications of a broader trend, the subcommittee needs to understand what the impacts are and what needs to be done to address the situation. Since fiscal year 2013, when the Air Force cut facility sustainment funding by nearly $1.2 billion, we have seen FSRM funding consistently below the OSD model of 90%, and we will hope to get more information on what these figures actually are. As a result of significantly degraded infrastructure, and as previous witnesses have testified, our full-spectrum readiness recovery timelines now extend beyond 2020, and even that can be accomplished only with stable funding. I hope that today our witnesses will provide specific examples of how risk in the infrastructure enterprise has affected the Air Force readiness, or could affect the readiness in the future. For example, we need to know if training opportunities are being lost, scaled down, deferred, or canceled because range safety and training functions are not adequately funded. We need to know if training engagements are no longer realistic or adequate to meet current operational needs because the facilities in which such training is conducted are no longer serviceable. Furthermore, we need to understand the investments in money and manpower which are lost with each affected exercise. Without fully equipped, functioning, and well-maintained installations, we cannot generate the readiness that is needed, and our men and women in uniform, as well as our civilian personnel performing their duties around the world, and the world deserve that, or around the country and the world deserve that. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. This concludes the last of the hearings that we'll be conducting, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you, Madeline. General Green, I've been told you'll be making one opening statement on behalf of all the witnesses, so please proceed. And as a reminder, your written testimony has already been made available to our members and will be part of the official record. General Green. Good morning.
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, distinguished members of the subcommittee, we're honored to represent America's Airmen as we testify before you today on the effects of reduced infrastructure and base operating support investments on Air Force readiness. For the Air Force, air bases, both enduring and expeditionary, serve as foundational platforms from which we project power through air, space, and cyberspace. The reliability, redundancy, and resiliency of our installation infrastructure are keys to enabling global vigilance, global reach, and global power, and therefore are critical to deter and defeat those that wish to do us harm. Recent Air Force budgets have been rooted in necessity and based upon our long-term strategy and vision supporting the Air Force's three priorities of taking care of our people, balancing today's readiness and tomorrow's modernization, and making every dollar count to help ensure that we can field, operate, and maintain a credible and affordable future force. Ready and resilient installations are an important part of the Air Force vision, but it's only one part. The Air Force's fiscal year 2016 budget sustains current warfighting efforts and places the Air Force on a path toward balancing readiness with necessary modernization in order to meet evolving threats. It funds vital military construction and aircraft bed-down projects, addresses facility sustainment shortfalls, and sustains critical base operating services, albeit at increased risk. We make every dollar count by targeting limited installation resources toward requirements which have the highest consequence on the mission, coupled with the highest probability of failure. Importantly, the Air Force recently stood up the Air Force Installation and Mission Support Center to provide an enterprise view of our installations, leverage lessons learned from across all of our major commands, and constantly strive to improve our core business processes in order to make the best installation investment decisions possible, balanced against maintaining combat effectiveness. Finally, a key component to help us close the funding gap is to leverage third-party financing where it makes sense. Our current third-party financing efforts are focused on areas that include housing and utilities privatization, energy savings performance contracts, and enhanced use leases. Your Air Force was born of innovation. From the first time pioneers of the Army Air Corps found ways to go over and not through, the Air Force has embraced new ways of thinking, taken prudent risks to accomplish the mission, and encouraged innovation to solve hard problems. And we continue to do so today as we concentrate on effectively and efficiently using limited installation resources to ensure mission success. So as you mentioned, joining me today is Major General J.D. Harris, the Vice Commander of Air Combat Command, who can give you a warfighter's perspective on our infrastructure. Notably, he's also the former wing commander of the 56th Fighter Wing at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona and the 8th Fighter Wing at Kunsan Air Base in Korea. You mentioned Brigadier General Chris Azzano. He's the test wing commander at Eglin Air Force Base today. He's also the former Air Base wing commander at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today and for your continued support of our Total Force Airmen and their families. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Green. I want to thank General Azzano also for his efforts there, and want to make sure too that we recognize all the great efforts that go on at our Air Force installations around the world. So I want to begin with this, just to kind of get a laydown. Then I want to make sure that we go to other members. As we look at the categories of facilities and the types of installations that the Air Force has in its inventory, can you give us a perspective about which ones are most important in raising and sustaining Air Force readiness? And I want to begin with General Harris to get his perspective as Vice Commander there at ACC at Langley. kind of give us your perspective, General Harris, as you look through the slate of things that you have to do there at Langley. And I visited there a number of times looking at some of the challenges that are there, whether it's hangars, whether it's the lighting systems on the tarmac there. Give us your perspective on how you prioritize, because obviously we're in situations where resources sometimes are short, so you have to figure out, where do you prioritize that. So give us your perspective as we begin about what categories of facilities and types of installation services are most important.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
When we look at the money that we're given and how we prioritize that, we have to look at the entire spectrum, as you rightly pointed out. So it's the facilities and the infrastructure from our platforms being our air bases that we concentrate on when it comes to keeping the installation ready. But it's much more than that. We also need the training ranges, whether it's an air range over Nevada or Utah or any of the many states that we're flying over the top of, to our space ranges that are off the coast near Cape Canaveral and near Vandenberg. It's very important to us. And we've also added in the last decade the cyber training areas that we have to work on, which is all infrastructure based.
Sure.
It's a balance. We have to be ready and win today's fight, but also modernize, prepare, and be ready in the future. And we're constantly making trade-offs as best we can, using, as General Green had highlighted, the what's probably going to fail next, the highest probability, and the consequences of those failures. So we have some things that they're just so high in consequences. In our nuclear mission, for example, we can't let those fail. So we continue to put emphasis there and on our priority missions. And that's been our approach, sir. It's look at what's probably going to fail next. If we had additional resources, we would get into more of the maintenance to extend and get the preventative work done. But right now, we're limited on that.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Bordallo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Green, we've heard from previous witnesses that fiscal constraints have required commanders at the Pentagon and in the field to prioritize immediate operational readiness and limited critical maintenance needs over less pressing infrastructure investments, but that this comes with some degree of risk. So in your written testimony, you stated that, and I quote, "We are already seeing the effects of this risk at many Air Force installations, and that failing infrastructure has had a direct impact on mission capabilities." Could you elaborate on this comment and provide specific examples of these impacts on training and operations and how the Air Force is trying to mitigate these impacts?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. I think I'd like to tell a little bit of a longer story for this one that will relate many aspects from training to operations. So, as General Harris mentioned, we have forces today that operate from the continental United States, so it's more than just training for us, although that's an important component. When we looked at the nuclear enterprise a few years ago, we began to do some analysis and some work in that area, led by Secretary James. We found that we had a significant underfunding or a significant gap in where our capabilities were in infrastructure in that area. And so as we looked to recapitalize the nuclear infrastructure, a part of that was the nuclear weapon storage areas. And we found that we need to recapitalize 4 and also build a new one. So 5 facilities, and that's going to be over a 13-year period and at a cost of roughly $1.3 billion. So we can't fix everything all at once. We have to look forward. What has been the impact of that? As we go forward, the committee approved and Congress appropriated funds for FY16 for the weapons storage facility at F.E. Warren, which is going to be a pathfinder for us. But when I look at Malmstrom Air Force Base, which I just visited last month, the missile maintenance facility there was built in 1957. And so local engineers began planning for new construction all the way back in 1991. We're going to be able to do that. It's a $95 million MOCON that we've currently planned for FY19. But in the interim, in the last 6 years, we've already spent $9 million trying to fix emergency problems that we've had and gaps. And we expect to spend another $11 million in the next 2 years just to get to where we can have the next MILCON project. So what is the impact of that? We've had fire suppression systems that have released. We've had water pipes break. We've had floor failures. And so when we do that in a missile maintenance facility like that, they're not able to do all the training that they're required to do. We suspended training and certification, so certification of nuclear missile maintenance technicians for 6 months while we made a repair last year. When those certifications are suspended, fewer airmen, as you go out of certification, other airmen have to come in and do that maintenance. So other airmen were working more shifts, longer hours while we had this training gap. That in turn kind of gets to some third order effects. Over the past 5 years, they've seen the retention of those airmen, those maintainers, drop from 75% to 20%. There's a myriad of reasons. We have a nuclear force improvement plan in place to do that. But certainly the infrastructure and the quality of your life, where you work, is a part of that price tag. So it's not just the dollars that we invest trying to get there. We have difficulty immediately going in and making a fix. So the fixes will often take years. In this case, it's going to be a 13-year fix, an investment plan. And there will be other things that will break and fail in the interim getting to that fix. And we don't need to spend millions of dollars. So that's kind of how these things can snowball in effect to go forward.
Policy memo is the requirement that the services fund sustainment programs at 90% or higher. So could you provide information on Air Force budget request as well as enacted levels for FSMRM funding compared to the OSD model since 2013? And what steps is the Air Force taking to meet that OSD requirement?
Yes, ma'am. We have prioritized within the Air Force sustainment, or the sustainment funding and the model funding at a high rate. So we've been at 80% on average over the years. I think we got up to 81%. And we manage that by taking an asset management approach to it. So again, getting back to what General Harris said, rather than having a straight investment portfolio, we're trying to understand the condition of our facilities and make that next investment. So we believe 80% has allowed us to be successful from the sustainment perspective. We recognize 90% would be desirable, but again, as we balance the risk, we found that to be an acceptable alternative, and we've maintained funding and the sustainment of facilities at the expense of military construction in previous years and at the expense of our restoration and modernization accounts, because it's easier to keep good facilities good, to take care of the oil changes, to do the things that we need to do with them. That's a better investment, we believe, than simply trying to fix things on the other end all the time and neglecting the day-to-day sustainment required.
Thank you, General, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo. We'll now go to Mrs. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. I have Whiteman Air Force Base in my district, so very much appreciate all the good work that the Air Force does and understand the challenges. Of course, we have a nuclear mission there, and appreciate the investments that have been made, and also your comments about how you've been creative and innovative and trying to find ways to make the most with the amount of money that you have had. Appreciated the example that you gave of some of the shortfalls. The purpose of the hearing is to determine if there's been a decrease in our readiness due to the lack of investment of the installations and how it has affected our missions. So I guess, first of all, do you have any other specific examples? So as we are advocating for more money for our military to help meet some of these shortfalls, do you have anything else that you could share besides the fire suppression systems that released and some of those things?
Yes, ma'am. Since I talked a lot, I'll see if General Azzano has anything he'd like to contribute.
Okay, great.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. I think probably the best way for me to start is to give a little bit of framework for some of the challenges that we've been facing. I've been an installation commander now for 2.5 years, first at Tinker Air Force Base and now at Eglin Air Force Base. Tinker Air Force Base is a large and diverse installation that is absolutely critical to our ability to wield national power. There are about 460 buildings there, a workforce of 26,000 people. There are 7 large military units, wing-level units. 3 of those are flying units, and that includes 1 command and control unit that is Air Force and a nuclear command and control unit that is United States Navy. 75% of the 460 facilities at Tinker are more than 40 years old. Tinker, we broke ground in Tinker back in 1941, just before World War II kicked off. Eglin Air Force Base is the largest installation in the Department of Defense. There are over 3,200 buildings across 724 square miles of that installation. 21% of those buildings are greater than 40 years old. There is a $10.8 billion infrastructure value of Eglin Air Force Base, a 20,000 strong workforce, 8 wings, and we conduct daily combat operations, research and development, test, and training out of Eglin Air Force Base. Eglin also, in fact, Eglin is a pre-World War II installation. Some of the challenges we're seeing that as this infrastructure ages are probably best relayed through some stories of things that we've seen that over the last few years that have gone wrong with our installations. In early 2014, a fire suppression system at an Eglin hangar inadvertently activated, dumping 17 feet of foam across a 90,000 square foot hangar. 5 aircraft were impacted, and the hangar was unusable for 83 days as a result of cleanup and an investigation that followed. The cause of this inadvertent activation was an insufficient heating in the hangar in cold temperatures. Now, as a workaround, we must drain the foam suppression system anytime that there are forecasted to be very cold temperatures down at Eglin, which fortunately is not that often, although we had that happen again this week. By draining that system, it reduces our ability to protect the assets inside the hangar. We still have a water system that can be used in the event of a fire, but the foam suppression system is much more effective. In the year that system was built, we had a choice. We could afford to install a fire suppression system that included foam, or we could afford to upgrade the heating system for the hangar. We could not afford to do both, so we chose the item that we thought was going to have greater payback over the long term, which was the suppression system. Over at Tinker Air Force Base, a little over a year ago, in the middle of the night, one of the electrical substations that powers the largest Air Force depot facility achieved meltdown temperatures in the middle of the night, and I'm told that you could see the meltdown from space. It was so bright. As a result, we lost power to the largest building, Building 3001 at Tinker Air Force Base, and many other buildings along the east side of the complex. That resulted in the loss of 3 shifts of work at the depot complex, which cost the American taxpayer $1 million in productivity for those 3 shifts. And it also resulted in at least a day's slip in the depot level maintenance and repair on dozens of aircraft that were residing in the building at that time. The total cost to bring in and replace the new substation was about $6 million. And an interesting side story to that, we had a contractor whose expertise is in power generation come in and take a look and do an assessment of the substation. And the contractor, the parts of the substation were so old that the contractor didn't even recognize them. So here's somebody whose expertise is in power generation. They did not recognize some of the infrastructure that we were using to support that very critical facility. Another example from Tinker Air Force Base, we had a water main break under a B-52 that was in depot level maintenance and repair. It lifted a large concrete slab that came very close to the airplane, did not damage the airplane, but it could have. And certainly if there had been workers there at the time, it could have resulted in injury to the workers. When the civil engineers at Tinker were trying to turn off the water supply and then troubleshoot, it became clear that the systems, the water systems underneath the hangars were so old that they didn't even have schematics to determine where the pipes were running. So those are 3 stories about some of the challenges we're facing with World War II era infrastructure. I've got others also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hartzler. We'll now go to Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. General, checking back home with the Air Guard in Connecticut, obviously, at your level and at the frontline level, everyone's been struggling with the budget instability over the last 2 or 3 years. The feedback we were getting is that the Sustainment Repair Modernization Funds was kind of the place that they could sort of mitigate some of the sequestration challenges that are out there. And I think that's kind of what you were referring to earlier. I just want to make sure or maybe not, but maybe you could just sort of help me sort of understand whether that's still going to be a strategy that folks are going to have to continue to look towards, or is the omnibus and the going to create hopefully maybe a different type of stability in terms of going forward.
Yes, sir. So thanks for the question. When I was alluding to how we use sustainment dollars, we essentially have three accounts or three sets of funds that we try to focus our efforts on. Military construction, which are line item appropriated, FSRM, and we have restoration and modernization, which we think of as repair. It's about putting the new tow bar on your vehicle. It's about improving it and taking care of things. Then we have sustainment dollars, which are more your oil changes and taking care of things consistently. So we have chosen to take less risk in sustainment over time and more risk in military construction and restoration and modernization. But we have not migrated dollars out of the FSRM account to support other activities within the Air Force. We still use the dollars for which they were appropriated by Congress. We treat that as a floor. We make sure that at the end of the fiscal year we've used every dollar as you intended with the appropriation for sustainment and modernization.
So the ink is barely dry on the omnibus that just passed. I mean, clearly that was preferable to having a CR for 2016, and hopefully with the lifting of the caps and the budget resolution, the 2-year budget resolution. Can you just sort of share with us whether or not that, again, the omnibus and the hoped for relief and the sequestration is, what does that mean in terms of your job compared to about a year or so ago?
Well, it really means the ability to plan, which is very, very important for us as we try to balance the risk. We try to build a good plan within the budget that we expect to be able to have, balance the risk across it, and then the things that emerge late, such as an incident if you think about the Tinker Hangar when the water came up through there, we will go ahead and take care of those, and it just takes money away from whatever we have planned. But if we don't have a number with which we can plan against, then everything we're doing work and rework, trying to adjust ourselves to the numbers. So the omnibus is very important for us to be able to plan. It doesn't always necessarily give us additional funding, but the planning is significant for us.
And if we had a CR for the rest of the year, I mean, using, I guess, 2015 as the top line, what would have been would that have aggravated your situation, or as opposed to passing an omnibus?
So if we have multiple continuing resolutions, it gives us challenges where we have to put in place bridge contracts. We have obligation timelines. We have to obligate 80% of our funds by a certain point in the year, and the money comes late. So I would say the omnibus certainly helps us avoid those kinds of activities. For example, we may have to not award a contract for the full period of the year if we were going to work something for an entire year because we didn't have the funding for the year. So our contracting officers have to go in and adjust the performance period, have a set of negotiations, and then when we get the next CR, we have to go through and have the same thing. We negotiate with the contractor for the next performance period. So continuing resolutions provide a lot of difficulty for us across the entire portfolio. It can be a range contract where we're doing range support. It's not just infrastructure. It's across every area where we have contracting and we have dollars. So we move the dollars around to account for funding, say, for the first quarter, the first 2 months, and then we have the same challenge again the next 2 months. So it's a lot of additional work, and I don't know if you have anything else.
Sir, if you don't mind, I'd add to that. Part of the time, if it delays for continuing resolution, then we end up with a period of time where some of the workers we could be using are laid idle while they're waiting on that information. And at a place such as Guam, where we have a fairly small population, if they're all working hard as they can for 6 months, but then we have to wait again because it's 1 October and it's a new fiscal year, we can actually reduce the time that we can get the work done that we're working on.
Right. Well, thank you. That's very helpful perspective. That CR versus omnibus. It's not just a sort of parlor game in Washington. It has real life consequences. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir, would it be possible to add one other thought to that?
Sure, go ahead.
So we have a very busy and relatively limited engineering staff at each of our large installations, and the challenge is to divide their time between designing and fixing issues as they arise real time, or planning for projects that have programmed funding. And with the uncertainty of funding that's brought about by the continuing resolution, the challenge for me is, where do I allocate that manpower? So if I have at the start of the year, there's a lot of uncertainty, and then I have to have 80% of my funds obligated such that I have 20% at the end of the year to expend. What we find frequently is that prioritizing manpower on the most important projects becomes a challenge because we often don't know whether we're going to get the funding or when we're going to get the funding. And what we'd hate to have happen is projects that are the highest priority that don't get funded because they don't have the adequate design work in time. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Cordy. Mr. Gibson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the witnesses. Thank you for your leadership, for your sacrifices, and for those of your family as well. I want to pick up on something that Representative Bordallo mentioned in her opening remarks, and particularly want to focus in on joint readiness and with a emphasis on the global response force. That, to me, I think it's really important that we restore this, fully restore this capability. I think it plays a key role in peace through strength. And obviously the Air Force is a major player in this: electronic warfare, fighters, bombers, air mobility, including delivering airborne forces, and then any kind of resupply operation. And so as we look at base operations and even some impacts on SRM and MILCON, please assess for me where you think the reduction in funding has impacted your ability to support joint readiness, including the global response force. If you need to do that for the record, that's fine too. But then I'm interested not only in that, but also your assessment on where we are today, given the realities of where we are today, your assessment and your ability to support joint training and joint operations.
Well, sir, thank you for that opportunity to talk about some of the best units that we have in our military, such as the 82nd, and what they do for that airborne force. We have made choices as we're getting smaller as an Air Force and pulling back or consolidating some of our forces. You see that in Europe. We're also doing that in the continental U.S., for example, at Pope. One of the things that we have made our commitment to is that we will not step away from the joint training, and that is one of our highest priorities. And as our Secretary continues to say, it's the airmen first. They're the one who are getting the work done with everything that we're putting on their shoulders. Their approach to it is to make sure that if a unit that is local or has just changed can't support it, then as you see at Pope, C-17s fly in and do much of that heavy lift from that joint readiness and training, just the way we would do it in combat. So we do share across, and we've got a fantastic organization in our airlift community that takes care of that. Part of that joint readiness is to make sure that we're meeting that mission team. So, for example, when we put in a major repairs to a runway like at Andrews, because we are reduced on the amount of money that we have, we will probably fix the runway and then any other emergency items that pop up, but we won't do everything that probably should be done on that routine maintenance, such as looking at the airfield drainage. And we have several of our runways that have truly been flooded or have additional damage to them because we didn't have the funds to get to fixing things that were built in the 50s or designed in the 50s and installed at that time that may or may not be suitable for the conditions that we see now.
Next area, thank you for that, General. And the next area has to do with impacts on retention. Appreciate the quality of our Air Force. It's certainly something we share to make sure that that is sustained going forward. And so I'm interested in your assessments and impacts on housing, child development, MWR, and the panoply of support network that we have, and whether or not you have any data that the impacts on the budget has impacted retention.
Thank you. I'll start, and then I'll probably hand it to Chris to see if he has anything to add from the installation perspective. But I think how we manage the quality of life in the force is much like we described earlier with the Global Response Force. We focus our resources on those priorities that are most important to the mission and also then to our airmen. And so if you think of from a services perspective, you mentioned child development centers and MWR facilities. We are investing in those things that we believe are most important more than those that are less important. So, for example, over the past few years with our child development centers, working with the family child care and school age programs and off-base partners, we have increased the number and the availability of child care for our men and women and our airmen by 41% from FY10 to FY14. We've expanded operating hours through the expanded child care program over the same time period. If we look at dining facilities, we've expanded the operations through our what we call FTI, Food Transformation Initiative, where we've partnered. And if you think of a traditional dining hall at an installation, that's operated about 56 hours per week. But by linking them together with transformation and having a vendor come in and help us, they not only operate the dining hall, but they may operate the bowling alley, they may operate the club. And then our airmen who used to only be able to take their meal card to that dining hall can go to any of those facilities. And so their hours of operation greatly expand. And then the last one there is fitness centers. We believe that's core. And so we focus on the core. We've maintained the services in those core areas to a higher degree, but we've also closed 40 MWR facilities in FY14. And so there are activities that we have sacrificed in order to ensure that we preserve those things that are most important. And that gets to the quality of life. Yes, when we make those other sacrifices and those changes, it affects our quality of life. But again, we're focused on those things that provide the greatest return for our airmen on their quality of life overall. So it's on the margins. I don't think I have data today that would suggest what quality of life factors are driving a retention issue, because I think we're doing a pretty good job of trying to focus on those areas that are the greatest impact. General Azzano.
Congressman Gibson, you've hit on a very important question there, and I appreciate that. We're constantly struggling with the balance between executing the mission, between joint readiness and quality of life for our airmen and our soldiers and our sailors and their families. I have a list, an integrated priority list that encompasses the inputs of all the commanders on Eglin Air Force Base, and there are dozens of items that need work, that need funding, that are either related to infrastructure, to test and training, to research and development, technology development, or to quality of life issues. And as you might imagine, when we go through and we prioritize, and the cut line for those items ends up being much higher on the list than we'd like, frequently the quality of life items do not make the cut. Some examples of that are we've needed a new fitness center at Eglin Air Force Base for a number of years. Tinker is the same way, and that has gone unfunded. A way that we have helped mitigate that is by going to 24/7 access, where with proper authentication you can actually enter the building and make use of the fitness centers. The challenge there, of course, is upkeep of the facility, and there is some risk too that people using the facilities in the middle of the night. If they have an issue, then there may not be anybody there to help them. We try to work around that with proper training and instruction, and so far we've been very successful. Other quality of life issues, HVAC systems that are old, very humid environment in Florida, lots of people in the middle of the summer working in very warm and damp buildings, despite our best efforts. We actually closed a dormitory a number of years ago, 280 people, because of an HVAC system that was sold. We couldn't find parts for it. There was mold growing in the facility, and for a time we had asked the airmen that were living there to use a diluted bleach solution and wipe down their walls regularly to prevent the mold from growing. So absolutely unacceptable conditions. We ended up closing that, but what that meant was that 288 airmen had to then go and live on the economy. These are 288 airmen that were given to us by their mothers and fathers to care for them, to train them, to help them with those first few years of transition into the military life, which can be difficult for many people. And we were unable to fulfill that. It also cost us extra money because we had to issue BAH to the airmen that normally would have lived in the dorms. So by no means a situation we want to be in. The replacement dormitory for that is scheduled to be funded sometime in the next 5 years. So high priority item that has still not made the cut list over the last few years. We need a new training and education center, and believe it or not, we have even prioritized to the point where roof repairs, roof leaks, are either structural and could cause potential damage to equipment and cause a threat to people working in the facilities, or they're cosmetic. So there are roof leaks that we're aware of that we have not fixed. And to be working in an environment where you have to put buckets under the drips certainly is not helping retention.
I know my time is expired here. Gentlemen, thank you for that testimony. We have listened, taken good notes here. know it's not easy. You're balancing risk and you're making hard decisions, and appreciate this testimony here today, which will, I think, be helpful to us. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I want to remind our witnesses, in fairness to all of our members here that would like to ask questions, if you'll keep up with the clock, and when it turns red, if you'll look for the closest opportunity to wrap up your questions, we will provide a second opportunity for our panelists here to ask questions. So you'll be able to get back to that. So don't be worried about missing that opportunity. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for being here. I represent Robbins Air Force Base and Moody Air Force Base in Georgia. And I have several friends who are contractors, and one of the things that I hope we're able to deal with is this issue of forcing things to the lowest bid short term, and that we will soon find a way to give you a way to accept the bid that's the best value long term instead of what meets a short term parameter. But I want to speak to you specifically about the Air Force in 2014 said they would shift away from the long-standing model of decentralized control and execution for providing installation support, and that you were going to stand up a new command. What progress has been made in standing up the Installation and Mission Support Center?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Great progress. We already have, it is up, it's operational. We call it the initial operation capability, and so they've gone through and they've taken responsibility for prioritizing our projects, for example, our programs. They're running all of our service programs for the Air Force. The engineering programs are the same way, and so they are already learning lessons from across the enterprise, and they're able to apply that to the benefit of the entire Air Force. So I think they're well on their way, and they're making good decisions today. They're setting their processes, but I'm very comfortable in saying it is accomplishing already the things that we intended for it to do.
So the goal was a reduction in duplication and efficiencies. Are you seeing any cost savings yet from the new system?
So I don't know that we can say there's cost savings of the installation impacts, because those are budget-driven decisions. So I would say that the impact in that case is really about the decisions, the effectiveness or the appropriateness of the decisions that they're making within the construct of the AFIMSC. We certainly significantly reduced the number of personnel who are performing this work across the Air Force. And so roughly about 920 folks, fewer are doing that work today than they were previously. And again, it gets to that decentralized versus centralized look that we're able to make now with technology and the tools that we have in place today that we didn't before.
Okay. So with regard to working capital fund organizations like the depots, do you have enough flexibility in the sustainment, restoration, and modernization accounts and the base operation support programs, or is there a need for more flexibility there?
I believe we have enough flexibility today, and I have not gone back and looked at the depot funding specifically in light of your question, so I can do that. But today, nobody has come to suggest to us, at my level at least, that they need more flexibility. We try to make that balance, so I'll check on that.
And the conditions at the depots, General, you spoke a lot about the conditions at one of the depots. The best depot in the United States is Robbins. Could you just speak to what efforts being made to improve the facilities at the depots across the country?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to give you my perspective on that. Obviously, the best thing to do for our depots would be to completely recapitalize the infrastructure. And when we have a new platform like the KC-46 that requires a significant amount of space and manpower to sustain that weapon system over its life cycle, that's exactly what we're doing. We are devoting MILCON funds to that program to make that happen. For our aging fleet, for our B-1s, B-52s, and some of the other older aircraft, F-15s, those are being maintained, sustained in many of them in World War II era facilities. Those facilities are large. The recapitalization bill for something like that would be tremendous. So what we find ourselves frequently doing is doing the best preventive maintenance we can and then waiting for things to break. And when I say waiting, I mean expecting that they're going to break while we are busy doing preventive maintenance and working some of the sustainment projects that have actually been funded. We try to get ahead in the design and the management of some of our sustainment projects so that we can, in the event there is fallout money. So I think we're doing a good job there, but the long-term challenge is having that 911 capability, if you will. We had a water main break, we had a roof cave-in that we can address real time, and at the same time looking ahead to very large and complicated facilities and saying, where do we look next? What is the next most important project? Where will we spend the next dollar that we have? And we have a fairly robust priority process that we go through to achieve that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. General Azzano, I want to go back to the response you gave a couple of questions ago and ask from your perspective. I understand that at the corporate Air Force level, there's directives on infrastructure and on installation support decisions. And we know that those filter down, and then from that standpoint, there are decisions that are made at the base level. And you talked about how those decisions are made, where the shortfalls are, and how you try to cobble together both resources and decisions to do that. Give me your perspective on how it affects the mission support and operations there at Eglin. And then if you can provide some additional examples. You started on some with the barracks there, with some of the older hangars, with water mains, those kinds of things. But give us your perspective on how those facility problems that may not be in the direct funding stream or may only get funded if there is an emergency affect overall operational readiness. Because what you're doing is listing them, and you're saying these things are tiered, and we're going to do those in order. A number of those at the bottom of the list are not going to be funded anytime soon. The only way they jump to the top of the list is for there to be an emergency. Obviously, at some point as that list grows, the impact on readiness continues to grow. Give me your perspective, and you laid out some examples, but I'd like to hear maybe a few more that are down on the list that may not even come to fruition because they don't reach an emergency situation, but give us perspective about how that affects operational readiness.
Chairman Whitman, thank you for the question. You really hit on one of my key day-to-day challenges and concerns, and that is that at some point the aging infrastructure will begin to fail at a rate that whereas today I can handle the emergency requirements that support day-to-day mission operations, they're going to fail to a rate at some point where I will no longer be able to do that. My sense as an installation commander now for 2.5 years is we are not there yet, but I would be, I guess, unwilling to hazard a guess at this point, but we're not that far off. And that's based on, I guess, a gut feeling of watching things over the last 2 years from in a very close perspective of the risk that we're taking in some key areas. There are a number of base operation support examples that things that fell below the cut line. One of them, a number of years ago, we canceled our grounds maintenance contract at Eglin Air Force Base. And we canceled that because the $3 million contract, we needed it for a higher priority to sustain a facility that was in bad need of repairs. As a result, we to offset that, we went and got some help from the local federal penitentiary. So we have inmates come in and do the grounds work now. It's not the same quality as the contract would have been. They require us to provide supervision. These are the same people that we have in very limited numbers that we could be applying to other tasks, and so it's taken its toll on us. Another example that concerns me that really illustrates the balance between risk that we take in each of our investments is force protection. So I have a very large installation, and there are a lot of ways to gain access to that installation. In the aftermath of Chattanooga and the events in Paris, we are obviously concerned about anti-terrorism and our ability to protect the people that live and work there. We have a very long list of items that could benefit from focused anti-terrorism funding. And as a result, I, as the installation commander, am taking risk. What is more important today? Is it more important to repair that airfield, or more important to install a serpentine entryway into one of my gates? So those are the kinds of questions that I'm grappling with. Another key investment area that I hadn't mentioned yet is information technology infrastructure. So we have a lot of aging network architecture. We have a lot of old copper wire for our communication systems. In 2017, they will reach, the existing communication infrastructure will reach its useful life. The plan is for us to transition over to voice over internet protocol. We have not achieved the level of investment that we need yet to make that happen by 2017, by the time it ages out. So ongoing challenges there.
Gotcha. Very good. Thanks for that perspective. General Green, I want to maybe take a step up as far as from the base level to the overall Air Force perspective on where we are in restoring full spectrum readiness and the association that it has with infrastructure and installations and facility support. Give me your perspective based on where we are right now. We now have the bipartisan budget agreement of 2015, which lays out for both 2015 and 2016 the top line spending elements. So there's some certainty there about what that number is. Give me your thoughts about how that affects the rate of ascendance and getting back to full spectrum readiness. So if you can give us, a date about when you expect to get back to full spectrum readiness, the impact that this new budget agreement has on being able to put in place or either keep status quo, accelerate, or possibly in some instances maybe even losing ground on your infrastructure projects and your facilities and installation support as it relates to the effort to establish full spectrum readiness or reestablish it.
Thank you. So from a facility perspective, what we believe is that the current agreement and certainly the FY16 budget has really arrested the decline that we were experiencing. The challenge will be sustained investment over time. As I alluded to earlier, we are not going to get well in a year and 2 years. We can't afford it. We couldn't execute it. And so it's about an ability to project sustained investment over a longer period of time. For us on the installation side of the business, to be comfortable that we're delivering the capabilities that we need so that we're not waiting for things to break unexpectedly, we believe we need about a consistent investment that would equal to about 2% of our plant replacement value. So if the plant replacement is $100 million, then about 2% of that a year should go into our FSRM accounts, our maintenance and repair, and our MILCON, and share that. And we think a sustained investment like that over a period of years could help put us back on our feet so that we weren't worried about the unexpected outages and the breakages that we've heard described today. So that's what it would take for us. A 2-year budget deal gives me some hope, but I would say right now we're just arresting. I do not see us in an ascent phase and improving ourselves from an infrastructure perspective. And again, as you noted, the infrastructure is only one aspect of our readiness, and so the Air Force certainly trades against all components of readiness to deliver capability. And General Harris, I don't know if you want to address any of those others or.
General Harris, I'll ask too for you to share that perspective, but let me ask too, not just the 2-year budget perspective and the risks associated with what you're going through to reestablish readiness, but give us a longer-term perspective too, because after 2016, we are back into the realm of sequester. So give me your perspective not only on where we are with the risks that you'll assume under a 2-year budget plan that's known, but if you'll give us some conjecture about 2 scenarios past that, level funding or back to sequester.
Well, thank you, sir, for the opportunity to respond to that. Readiness is complicated, and we use several different levers to make sure that we've got the right balance of readiness, because if we fully funded the flying hours associated with that, that would come out of our other modernization or installation accounts. So we're reducing each one of those to try and maximize that capability so that we get at what the Secretary and the Chief is their second priority, is balancing readiness now versus modernization in the future. Having that steady plan allows our engineers and our teams to go out and budget everything that we can for the next 1.5 years, 2 years at the levels that we have and draw that cut line. Having been in an Air Force corporation that drew that, we took from the installation commanders, we prioritized that. We are now able to do that with one voice through IMSC, discussed earlier, and that's a benefit for us because then it looks across all portfolios, not just mine and a combat, but it covers the transportation, the cyber, the space, all of the domains that we work in. And that's a huge help for us that will come to fruition over the next several years. Having that, we draw that line, but then the emergencies that you hear about, the flooding at Laughlin that closes the base for 3 days, there are second and third order effects for that, but then we have to unfund something that was above the line and go put the money in that position. So that always changes our plan, but being able to plan at least gives us a starting point and allows us to talk about the priorities that are important for that readiness. Once we have those portions of the conditions set, we also need to slow down on our deployment and our combat operations tempo. And right now, the Air Force, we are not being asked to do less. We're being asked to go more, to push harder, to make sure that our enemy knows that not only are they not able to continue attacking, but their time on this earth is going to be reduced with the way we're taking the fight to them. That has impacts then on our weapon system sustainment and our ability to acquire the munitions for that. Again, that's all balanced on that funding. But once the conditions are set, deployment ratio probably about a 1 to 4 ops tempo. We have the ranges, the infrastructure that we need with the threats, the emitters. We have the talent pool in our maintenance to turn and make sure that the equipment is ready to go. Then we start building that 8 to 10 year readiness that's going to take us a long time, that 8 to 10 years. If any one of those aren't met, we are still holding that 8 to 10 years further down the road. So instead of being ready by 2023, if it's a delay of another year or two, or as you say, sir, if we go back to sequestration after the 2-year budget deal that we have, it will further delay that readiness picture.
This question, you're on track to reestablish full spectrum readiness in 2023. Does the bipartisan budget agreement of 2015 make any impact on that? Does it move that number to the left, or does it just help you sustain the course to 2023?
I would say, sir, at the PB level funding, 2023 is within sight. But again, we are not being asked to do less. So right now, if you were to look at our warfighters and the installations, we still have so many airmen downrange. They're not available for the training, and that's a part of that full spectrum readiness. So we're on track, but we're right on that razor's edge. If we're funded less or we don't get relief from the deployments doing our nation's business, then it will push past 2023.
Gotcha. Thank you. I understand the world gets a vote in that too. So, Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just a single question here for General Green. In your testimony, you mentioned several examples of leveraging partnerships with local communities to address infrastructure needs at the Air Force installations. Now, how are you determining priorities, deciding which projects are appropriate for funding through these partnerships, and whether they are truly in the government's best interest to accept, operate, and maintain? Can you describe the controls that are in place so that the Air Force's requirements are being effectively met?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question. So who decides is really depends on the level or the scope of the partnership with the community. So there are many agreements that the communities are able to make a partnership or have an agreement with the installation that they can execute at a local level. And so there would not be an Air Force enterprise look at that. In other cases where there's legal authorities involved, we're evolving toward prioritizing those kinds of efforts as well. But initially, as we began exploring this, our wing commanders really had a lot of flexibility to work with our staff so we could learn what the art of the possible was. And now that we've experienced that, we recognize we have a better understanding and we need to begin prioritizing because we have limited staff. And so I think you'll see over the next few years, we'll begin prioritizing those efforts. One example would be at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. There's a partnership agreement that's being developed right now. I'm not sure if it's been finally signed, but the community will use some installation land, some land that belongs to Seymour Johnson. They'll build a multi-field sports complex of 8 fields, do different things. And so the community will get to use that the majority of the time. The installation will get to use it for their rec leagues, their youth leagues, some fitness training in the mornings, and some weekend tournaments. But that's about a $6 to $8 million investment that the community will make on Air Force property that the Air Force will then be able to take advantage of those services. So it's a real win-win. Other people are involved because it's an enhanced use lease. There's authorities and agreements that have to be put in place. But as we get to those larger scale agreements, I think we will begin prioritizing that today we're not. Today we're learning what the art of the possible is, and then we're going forward with the prioritization. Other agreements can be done locally. They can reach an agreement to have our medical personnel train in the local emergency room and get some time down there. That does not require the Air Force to devote resources or identify all those requirements outside. So it just depends on the scope and the scale as to who will be making some of those decisions, ma'am.
So because of less funding now, are the partnership agreements, are there more now or less, or?
There's certainly a great deal of interest now, and so at many of our wings, I would even say today, probably most of our wings, there's an effort, there's groups that are working between the installation and the local community to identify those areas where we can have partnerships and then spread those around. So I believe it's the majority of our installations today that have a partnership program, and they're exploring those opportunities.
In your opinion, General, would you say they're successful in most cases or all cases, or?
Yes, ma'am. I think they're successful because of the process today that we're asking the community and the wing leadership to go through is to define the art of the possible and understand our limits. And so we want to go in with a pretty big aperture to see and think. But before we reach those specific agreements, we want to make sure they're win-win. So I think by the time we're getting to the nuts and bolts, I think we really are having more win-win scenarios. And again, they're not all big dollar, but I think we have more success than we have failures because we will identify the obstacles along the way.
And I feel it's a good public relations when you're working with the community. I support this. So I want to thank you very much for your testimonies, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo, General Green, General Harris, General Azzano. Thank you so much for your testimony today, and we appreciate your perspective on this. This is very important as we go into this year's National Defense Authorization Act to make sure that we address readiness from a infrastructure, installations, and facility support perspective, because many times we get somewhat myopic in how we see the element of readiness, and we understand that in order to generate readiness, you have to have that foundation to create that readiness. So to be able to get your perspective and make sure we reflect that in this year's NDAA is going to be very important. So again, we thank you for your time today, and with that, our subcommittee is adjourned.